Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And I'm always looking to find new people, interesting people to talk to, and old people I've spoken with in the past, to talk about the current transits and the trends that we see in the world today as we're going. We're living in a very fractious time, so to speak, as we all know. And the unsettled nature of our current climate is one that allows us to get a lot of information from what we see in the current transits of the astrology charts. We'll be talking about 2018. My guest is waiting in the wings. He'll be on in a few minutes. Before we start, I want to remind you about my own newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find about 2 paragraphs or so of mundane astrology as they apply to all of us in the world. And then I break it out into the individual signs below that. I always encourage you to get as much information of your own personal birth chart and apply it to the transits that I write about each week. So if you know your sun sign, you know your rising sign, you know your moon sign, combine them together to get the most accurate picture. And you can always contact me. You can get to my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. So, without any further ado, I want to get my guest on. His name is Dr. Michael Lennox. I ran into him a couple of years ago. We had a great conversation back then. He's willing to come back on today to talk about what we see in the world in 2018. He's a psychologist and an astrologer, which I find to be a fascinating combination. And his website is michaellennox.com. That's Michael, the regular word Michael, and Lennox.com. So, without further ado, let's get him on. Dr. Michael Lennox, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. Great to have you back.
Great to be here. One little just shift. There's 2 N's.
That's what I was going to say. You know, I thought there may have been 2 N's. I knew that. 2 N's, 2 L's and 2 N's. So it's Michael Lennox.
2 L's, 2 N's.
2 L's and 2 N's, right. So anyway, Michael, as you look out at the world today through your eyes, which I find to be fascinating, I've always been intrigued by the fact that you're a psychologist and an astrologer because you're an odd combination in that regard. Many people fall down on one side of the fence or the other, but not usually both. And I think that's an unusual rare quality that you bring to the table, which I think adds a lot of greater depth to the information that you can provide for us and helps us round out that whole picture better. So looking at the world today and what you see coming up, what's sort of your, takeaway, your elevator speech about, so to speak, about that?
Sure. Well, one of the questions I get asked often as an astrologer is some version of, well, when's it gonna stop? Or when's it gonna get better? Right. Or when's it gonna calm down? And the it they're referring to is the sort of what I like to say, the world gone mad. Right. And of course, the answer is it's not. We are not in a time that is going to get calmer, slower, better. And I use air quotes when I say better because there is no bad in my world. Mm-hmm. We are in an accelerated time. And I think one of the values of both psychology and astrology in this moment with the world gone mad is it's the discipline of orienting yourself to the universe as it is, the world as it's moving, gives us all an opportunity to be with and in relationship to the world in such a way that we don't see it as our enemy, but actually that we are part of it, that we are connected to the wave of craziness. And it really is possible with a grounded spiritual practice and an open heart and mind to meet the world on the world's terms and actually be someone who's bringing something positive and uplifting to the world as opposed to feeling like you're being beaten down, by it. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing I would say in answer to your question is, well, we are in a crazy, crazy, crazy time. Yeah. It's not going to get better or smaller or quieter. We might as well learn how to roll with it and not see it as such a separating mechanism, but that we're actually part of it, and therefore it's possible to live in it, with it, of it, as it, in a more uplifting kind of way.
Right, and I've often come away with the opinion that the more disruptive and fractious the times are, the greater the potential is for greater good to be done, because it's in that time of that tension that we arrive at a point of necessity, so to speak, so that when we respond to these times where we are living in that are difficult, we respond in ways that sort of forcing us into that situation, which I think ultimately brings us to a better and greater, higher place, ultimately.
Absolutely. One of the fascinating, artifacts of the planet Saturn, which represents our lessons and learnings and karmic responsibilities, and he's called the Great Teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, as an astrologer, you know that he just spent 2.5 years in the sign of Sagittarius. And one of the hallmarks of Sagittarius is that archetype is the holder of truth, higher truth, the truth teller, the truth knower. And one of the things that happened in the last 2.5 years that has been challenging for all of us on the planet is that we are getting to see things about our world that had remained sort of under the radar or hidden or pretended to not be so, became very, very, very visible. So even just in the United States, in the political landscape, without even alluding to which side of the politics I might personally land on, the idea that in light of what has been happening in politics, many, many things that were buried and hidden became visible. And you can't heal a challenge or a problem unless it is made visible and brought into the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing happened in the world of sexual misconduct, that as Saturn finished out his traversing through the truth-telling sign of Sagittarius, right, left, and center, you couldn't go a day without someone else being exposed for past behaviors that in the past would have remained hidden and unspoken about, suddenly became, very visible. And it's in that visibility, in uncovering hidden truths, that healing can occur.
Right. And I know I agree with you on all those points. The only thing that concerns me is that some of the things that have been revealed are going as just sort of another, just another event. It does not be, because people are being so inundated with these Me Too accusations that they become immune to them. They become less powerful. And I agree with you that they had to come out and the timing of it was perfect. But what scares me is the fact that people just go, oh, ho hum, another person, and it doesn't take on the same weight. That's the only concern I have about that. Now, perhaps that as Saturn moves further into Capricorn, we'll get to the more foundational qualities of what that means, and maybe we will see some real, true action taken on that part. You follow what I'm saying as far as...
I do completely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that happens for me as I listen to you pointing that out is I'm reminded that when I look at the arc of the healing that is available in the world right now, I naturally and organically respond to it in a very long-term viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't get terribly concerned with what I might see in my lifetime. I do the work helping people and myself personally in the time that I'm here, with a great appreciation that I may not see any tangible results while I'm here and while I'm living, but I still do the work that I do, knowing and hoping that the descendants and the generations that follow will benefit from the shifts and the changes that we're attending to today. Yeah. So when you point out that there's a kind of inuring that we get into and a kind of numbness that happens when there's accusation after accusation, I agree, and I do think that's a challenge. But picture 2, 3, 4 generations forward with young people being born into a world that is now having a new conversation about what is acceptable behavior from men and women in the world, where there's just a healing taking place, then generations that are born into that world will produce generations born into yet even more of a healed world. And so that's where I take my comfort, is looking at the long range view.
Yeah, no, I'm much the same way, and I think that we sort of I think of it as a pendulum cycle, whereas the pendulum's gone so far, and then it has to trip and go back and to tip the balance the other direction, and this may be the point where we find that. I think that the conversation is the elephant is in the room, is now in the room, and we can see the elephant now. We know that it's there. We can't avoid it, and I think the value of that is pertinent, because we're going to see the results of that, I think, manifest over time. The expose had to happen. This was a fait accompli. It had to happen. It has happened, and now the healing has to begin. It is a slow process, but I do also agree with you that it is in the challenge of the times that we find the greatest potential for growth. Because if things were hunky dory, we become apathetic and sort of we would just become blasé about the whole thing. This allows us to grab our attention and allows us to focus on going forward.
Absolutely. There's no wiggle room.
Yeah. It's fascinatingly accurate too when you think about it. I mean, this is what we love about astrology, is that we see these major themes happen, especially with a planet like Saturn and of course Jupiter and Scorpio. And we see these great, and we're going to see Uranus moving into Taurus later on this year. These are exciting. When these big outer planets move and change signs, we see this great progress taking place. It's a bit unsettling at times. Granted, like the old Chinese phrase says, maybe live in interesting times. Well, we certainly do live in interesting times. And I think that we tend to become sort of glossed over by our own current situation and realize that, there's been plenty of times in the history of the planet when life was much more difficult, or even harder, or equally as difficult as we see ourselves now. I think it grabs our attention more because it's so visceral and real to us right in our own lives now. But it's always been there. We haven't really ever had immensely perfectly good times all the time anyhow. So there's these ebbs and flows of the cycles, I think, which are important to watch and at least to reflect on.
Absolutely. I think that just being in a body alone is difficult.
Yeah, that's true. Waking up in the morning and seeing. But right. we are in a different world. I mean, our whole conversation is incredibly different now than it was, say, 10 years ago, simply by virtue of the technology that we embrace. We are in a much different time where things are much more immediate. The propensity of in fake news, for example, is very clear right now. So it brings out, it levels the playing field in some ways, where there is no overarching authority any longer. We've sort of all on this together, it seems like.
Well, and I think that you point out the time frame of the vast shift of new technology shifting and changing everything, and the new technology and the internet is sort of a byproduct of the Aquarius mansion. Mm-hmm. The ruler of that sign is Uranus. Uranus spent the last bunch of years in Aries. Aries is the startup energy, the first sign of the zodiac that sort of starts the whole thing off. And you could make a case for Uranus entering Aries began the explosion of the connectedness that the internet and cell phones and smartphones has created. And that startup energy was very disruptive, lots of growing pains, a lot of difficulty in navigating how to be in a world where suddenly you're carrying around in your pocket a piece of technology that changes everything. And so one of the possible artifacts of Uranus moving into Taurus, which is a grounded earth sign, is that we will begin to settle into how to be in this brand new territory that so dramatically, leapt upon us in the last decade.
Yeah, it really is a very unusual phenomenon, I would think, especially through the eyes of a psychologist, because when you think about what the social media platforms in and of themselves alone do to people and how they captivate them and grab their attentions and sort of imbue everybody with this sense of obsession almost, and this sort of compulsive behavior to see what's going on and to like what you see and don't like what you don't see, and this whole interchange although I find it very interesting at times, and I love being able to connect with people and friends, but by the same token, it opens this door to this wide array of concepts and behavior that we've never had to deal with before. Now, instead of driving down the highway and seeing a billboard every 7 or 8 miles, we see one every 3 or 4 inches, and every 3 or 4 inches is another person's face on the highway, and we're just inundated with this barrage of self-marketing, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it is very challenging, and I think that because we don't know how to be in this new world, there is,
there's no rules.
Yeah, it's got its own rules. We don't know them yet. Yeah. And I can tell you that as a psychologist, I have not an enormous therapy practice because I'm sort of engaged in a lot of spiritual teaching and different modes of working with people. But I will say one of the most confounding things that does come up with the people that I'm interacting with in the consulting room as a therapist is how to navigate interpersonal relationships and the text.
Yeah, it's
the
just
concept of the text. Mm-hmm. It's like the best and worst thing that ever happened to relationships is the invention of the text.
Yeah, it is just incredible. I mean, I remember going back to, AOL Internet Messenger back, 10 years ago, and remarking then that you cannot put nuance in a text. You can express emotions, you can express some emotions, but you can't get the nuance. You don't get the body language. You don't get the real true meat of what the person's trying to say, and a lot gets misconstrued, and it requires a lot of backpedaling sometimes to get back in shape, or get back to where people understand you and can trust you. It's just a really unusual phenomenon in itself. I mean, as you say, it's great, honey, pick up a quart of milk on the way home. But then, if you're talking to somebody in another country about a different subject, or whatever you are, whatever the situation may be, you can see where it can easily come unwound very quickly.
Yes, in fact, I think when I remember in grad school when we talked about communication, the psychology of communication, I believe that words amounted for what was considered 20% of meaning, where 50% was tone of voice and 30% was body language and facial expression, and you were left with 20% of meaning. In fact, here's one of the ways it plays out in therapy, which is hysterical, and I don't always know what's the best way to meet and respond to this. The person sitting on the couch will convey the text conversation that they've had with a dramatic intonation, giving the other texter the tonation that they are believing was meant in the text. But they really don't know what the tone was, but they create a whole narrative, and sometimes the tone is contemptuous or angry, or when the person who's reading the text really doesn't know, everything that is meaningful is being projected onto it, and that's disastrous when it comes to actually having a satisfying communication experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like having an interpreter in the room, and the interpreter's not getting all the language right,
That's right.
And it's just insane in some ways because, I mean, I'm sure we've all had this experience where you've maybe texted jokes to somebody and it comes out flat or comes out wrong, doesn't have the same meaning, or is even taken the wrong way. Or even anything along those lines, you can imagine how the conversation would go. But I think that, we're speaking two different languages, and we got an interpreter in the middle who is sometimes getting it right and sometimes getting it wrong, and that just adds to the confusion even more so. And then you take it on a wider scale where you're doing this on Facebook in a public forum. You can easily see where things can go haywire. And then you add to that a divisive and fractious sort of political administration at this time, and you can see it just exploding into a. And I think what will happen is there'll be a backlash in some ways to this, where, like, as you mentioned, when Uranus steps into Taurus, where we become more grounded and people begin to go back to community, back to face-to-face conversations. That would be my hope. It's far more satisfying to see somebody in person than it is to be, texting at somebody, as you well know.
Well, I mean, I would respectfully invite you to remember, though, that we're never going back to that.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, that's true.
We're never going back to that. What I think is possible is that there can be some incorporation into how we teach our younger people the structure of communication that allows people to understand the distinction of when you don't have tone of voice and body language, you must approach the language differently. And the same, by the same token, when you are presenting your communication and you're sending texts, if something requires a nuance of meaning, pick up the phone.
Right. But do you think that that exercise is diminishes language? It has to in some ways. I mean, it removes so much of the colorful and the depth that we can get with language and words. We are sort of minimizing our responses back and forth to abbreviations, acronyms, or whatever. Right? I mean, it's just
well. I mean, yes, of course, but it really, now, Chris, you sort of which conversation do we want to have? Do we want to have the conversation of loss? Or do we want to have the conversation of gain? We have the awkward sort of straddling the two generations challenge, which is that we come up in a generation where it didn't exist to communicate in this way, and now it exists to communicate in this way. And we are very present to what has been and what is being lost. And so many people will have an attachment to staying involved in, well, we're losing this and it's just terrible. Mm-hmm. I like to look at the evolution of the being, the planetary being, and the excitement of what's possible with this sort of added, what Barbara Marx Hubbard calls it, the noosphere. There's intelligence in the internet. There's a sphere of intelligence that now encircles the Earth. It's made up of structures. Some of those structures are satellites, and there's a connection to that brings every piece of information that is knowable to the human race accessible to the human race in this digital, electronified sphere of knowing and knowledge. I think that's amazing. I think that's a miracle. Mm-hmm. And it is terribly challenging to be present in a moment when we are so new in that and so young in that we are flailing at how to bridge the gap between the old way and the new way. I think part of our job as teachers, I see my job as a teacher in this middle sort of ground where it's so awkward and challenging, is to help the planetary being move into the new realm of lightning flash, instantaneous connectivity to communication and all-knowingness without losing our humanity, but not from the perspective of, oh my God, it's terrible that we don't get to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's possible, and again, back to several generations from now, the human race will know how to navigate this with grace and ease, and we will still be the human race.
Right. And you raise a very good point. I mean, I ultimately am an optimist, and I do embrace it. I think the questions I raise are more rhetorical than anything else, just to get the conversation started. But, we said the same thing was said about TV, the same thing was said about radio, the same thing was said about the automobile, and we know how we embrace them all now. The same thing was said about microwaves and fax machines, too.
Yes.
But we still we embrace it. But I think you're right. This is a little bit different in as much as it's a basic human shift that's changing as opposed to just a device.
It's utter. Yeah. Like, yes, the radio, yes, big, but a portion of our consciousness impacted by the radio and the television. This is complete and total. Yeah. Transformational, revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. And it does change the dialogue between people, and that may very well serve to be a great thing. We can now connect with people we never would have connected before. Like, that's a wonderful thing. So the simple fact that you and I are on the phone right now is part and parcel of that. But and that's a wonderful quality, and it helps us broaden. I think it ultimately broadens our knowledge base. What I would wonder about would be the natural curiosity that comes from having to research something now instead of just, going, do libraries become different now? Do books become different? Do people still read? Or do they just do a Google search or whatever to find out what they want to find out? Or does it supplant our memories in some ways? If you can't remember the name of a movie theater, of an actor, you type the name of the movie and you're going to get the name of the actor rather than going to find it out yourself or having to depend upon your memory to recall that. I often find myself in situations. Yeah.
It's going to change everything.
Yeah. I find myself in situations where I can't remember an author or a musician or something like that, and I will sit there and I'll struggle and then force myself to remember it by myself without going to the phone or going to the Google to find out the answer to that. I really struggle. And it's there, it comes back, it always comes back to me within a matter of minutes or so, but it's not as quick. And I'm wondering if that is just because I'm aging or because it may very well be not enough brain cells left in my head, or it could just be the fact that we're into a new era, which I think is part of it. And
we're into a new era, and our children and children's children and children's children's children will live in a world where the idea of having to remember numbers won't even be a consciousness.
It's true. Yeah.
We think of that as a loss, but we're irrelevant. We're going to be irrelevant in a few decades because we'll be gone and there'll be new generations operating
it's true.
in
It's
this brand
so true.
new world.
It's so
and
true.
So I'm less interested in the backward conversation of what we've lost and the forward conversation of what we gain, what we get out of it. And, even the internet alone is one of those things where we could look at all of the uplifting, consciousness expanding, intelligence increasing wisdom that's available because the internet exists. We can have a conversation about the dark web. Mm-hmm. And how all of the most nefarious elements and aspects of the human condition and experience also become available to those people who are vibrating at that very low level and support the expansion of the darkest of the dark parts of the human experience. But we don't get to lift up the whole system without lifting up the entire system.
That's true. You get the good with the bad. You get the good, the bad, and the ugly. It all comes together. That's true. But I think, as I said, I'm ultimately an optimist, and I do have a broader view of where this goes. I do think that there's some great potential here, and I don't like the backwards look myself because I know we can't go back. That's inevitable. We're not going backwards at all, and America's not going to be great again. That's not to say we won't.
No. I'm curious, Chris. I'm going to turn the tables on you and ask you first. What do you think about the gathering of Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn that starts in 2020?
I think that's a major, and of course, when Jupiter enters there, it's going to be a huge foundational restructuring.
That's right. Huge. That's right. And so one of the things that I talk about when I'm asked about 2018 is you can't talk about 2018 without talking about 2020. And I've never done that before because I've never, ever felt the need as an astrologer to talk about some future date in order to help understand the present landscape. But I do think it's important that because there's this enormous wave that's building that does have a kind of point in the very near future that says that's the current wave's high point. Mm-hmm. 2020, all through that year, as Saturn and Pluto meet and then retrograde and meet again and retrograde and meet again, and Jupiter comes through and waves with them, making everything enormous. That is the peak of the current wave that I think has been building since Pluto entered Capricorn.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really, really, and that is a very interesting point you've made. We're going to take a quick break here. We've been talking today with Michael Lennox, Dr. Michael Lennox. His website is michaellennox.com with 2 L's and 2 N's. You know where the L's and the N's go, hopefully. And it's a great website. He's got a lot of information there. Great newsletter that goes out every week, and also a lot of interesting data there. Books for sale. A lot of interest. I encourage you to check it out while we take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. We're talking today with Dr. Michael Lennox. We're talking about astrology and where we are going and this great swirl of our planet. So hang in there. We'll be right back. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Dr. Michael Lennox. His website is michaellennox.com. There's 2 L's and 2 N's in that URL, and it's a great website. I encourage you to go there. And we're talking today about, what we see in the world, and we're sort of having a good, organic, naturally unfolding conversation that we sort of, as astrologers, would give us the opportunity to sort of philosophize, I guess you could say, or at least ruminate on where we are and where we're going. And, I like the idea that you mentioned about sort of this, we're not going back, of course, and the idea of we can approach this openly and willingly and with open arms and optimism, or we can begrudge it and bemoan the fact that the good old days are gone. But I think ultimately we have no choice in that. We have to move forward. That is the nature. We are on the river of life. The river does not stop and go back. It goes forward. As we're going forward, we are met with these times such as we are in right now where the trials are there, the challenges are there, but it is only through challenge that one grows, I think, and that's true for all of us individuals. It's that when you are faced with a challenge, that is when you expand and you grow to meet the challenge. And then when the dust settles, which it will eventually, perhaps in some smaller capacity, maybe not quite so fractious as it is now, it will allow us to say, wow, that was tough then, but look at who I am now as a result. And I think that's a very valuable lesson for all of us.
I agree. And one of the things that I get out of astrology is an appreciation for the replication of the small in the greater, like the idea that what's happening in the solar system is also happening inside my imagination. And by the same token, what happens for the individual is also happening for the collective. And so if and as individual human beings on the planet come to a transformational place, come to a moment where they suddenly understand what forgiveness is and how transformative that can be, and they have a change in how they see their life, their family, their relationships, their expression in the world, the world can do the same thing. The world at large can have a transformational shift and change in perspective. Now, I don't think it happens as fast, and as I've alluded to, as we've both been talking about, this is a long-range goal. But I do, as you are an optimist, I do believe in peace for humanity. I do believe in the arc of evolution in the direction of the good. I believe that love wins, but we got to get through the mighty challenging moments when the evidence will will present itself to us that it's not true, that love doesn't win. So those are the moments when we just have to pick up our bootstraps and say, no, I'm committed to this. I'm committed to seeing, as I sometimes like to say, peace on the planet, even if I have to imagine it in between the bullets.
Right. Well, you know what I could easily envision? I could easily see, peace coming in a sort of an awkward way whereby, war becomes antiquated as it's being waged now, and it becomes a sort of a robotic war. And who knows? I mean, there may be steps along the way where humans aren't as involved as they are now. But I do believe that peace is ultimately on its way. I do think it's a goal that is something that we all want. I think people at their core want this. I just think we are impatient is what it comes down to. We're impatient, and we want it to happen faster than it can happen. And it's just such a major change in evolution that we can't force that river.
That's true. And even when I was a little boy, I spoke in language that was ultimately hyperbolic. Mm-hmm. It was natural for me to say things in broad sweeping terms. Like as a teenager, I would say things like, oh, I've been, experiencing that for years, though I was only, 17 years old, because I feel I'm naturally oriented to connect to the long term. So it's easy for me to be committed to peace for humanity because I naturally think about what the planet might be like in 1,000 years. I understand that that's not typical. I understand that most people are desperate to see something in their lifetime that I don't think is seeable or possible within our lifetime. And I think one of the challenges that I know that I have as a spiritual teacher is how to get someone committed to seeing the beauty and the bounty in the world today, because the media and the other evidence producing mechanisms are constantly showing us all of the breakdown.
Right, and that is a challenge in itself because it requires us to step out of our comfort zone. It requires us to accept that which we don't like. It allows us to tolerate that which we don't like, and those are areas that perhaps are not new, or are new to us in some ways. But the idea of accepting where we are, that is a very, it's a huge concept of being fully present, being where you are, being able to accept where we are at this point in time and not begrudge it and look forward with optimism. That's a difficult concept to get across to people. I agree.
I love astrology for exactly that reason. So the moon is where the moon is.
Yeah.
She's not anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I personally have a very visceral relationship to both my breath and my physical body, so that my daily spiritual practice involves a form of meditation that is breath oriented. Mm-hmm. And I, as a result, I feel the experience of the energy that's available on any given day as it is shaped in that day. Astrology tells me where all the geometry is, and on some days that geometry is very friendly to my body, and some days the geometry is unfriendly to my body. Now, the breath is the breath is the breath. There's no difference in the mechanism of I breathe in and I breathe out. I breathe in and I breathe out. But some days it requires enormous effort, and some days it requires nothing because it's graceful and it's easy. And there's no making a graceful day challenging unless I choose to make up stories about my life that aren't true. And there's nothing that can make a challenging day more easy other than patience and grace. Mm-hmm. And so for me, astrology is the art of meeting life on life's terms exactly as it is that day. And that's part of my intention and desire set when I introduce people to astrology is to help them understand that though each day's sensation changes, and some days you're not going to like the sensation you're met with, you can meet it and allow it to be what it is without decrying it or wishing that it was different.
Yeah, those are all very good points. And the same thing applies to relationships and people, I think, because we may run across people that we're not getting along with, and we may run across people we love. But it's in that same arc that you're talking about that we say, this person, and especially as an astrologer, you can look at someone's chart and say, well, this is why I have difficulty sometimes with this person, but this is the way they are. I accept them as they are, warts and all. We have to do that. This is part of one of the things I like about astrology is it allows us to express tolerance because we can understand that this is karma. This is when the person came to the world in this form and fashion, and we either take them as they are or not. And I think that's another side of the same coin that you're talking about.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and yet when we look at this, we are in a time, there is this geometry factor, which is really important because people often don't understand this. I guess unless you're pretty well versed in astrology, that the geometry is incredibly important in this. And when we see a collection of planets coming up as we are in 2020, we can easily say, wow, this is going to be we're going to be in for a different time. Things are going to look different in 2021, 2022, and so on. And there'll be more stuff to come. But it's exciting nonetheless because we are on the brink of discovery and evolution, and it's a very adventurous time if we can embrace it for what it is and say, hey, we're on a wild roller coaster ride. It's going to be fun. Sometimes it's going to be really scary other times. But that's the way it is, and it's a part of the acceptance pact.
Yeah, I'm excited personally, like literally personally excited for the enormity of the changes and the shifts that are coming. And one of the things that I hope happens, and at least I'm told that this happens when I'm speaking or teaching in the room or on the internet, is that my enthusiasm sometimes becomes a little infectious. That people respond to my enthusiasm about the exciting changes to come, that they feel a little bit more accepting of the enormity of the changes because I'm not terrified. And so they can grab onto my confidence until they can sort of muster some of their own.
Right.
One of the questions that I'm often asked, and you probably are asked this too within sessions and even, at larger teaching, venues is, oh, well, is that going to be good or bad?
Yeah, I know.
It's like that's not even a question in my lexicon. There's no such thing as good or bad. That's just a judgment that you're adding to the sensation that is. So the question you want to be asking is, what might that feel like?
Right. And prepare yourself for that. Say, what is this going to look like? What's it going to feel like? And how do I best enter into this realm? How do I manifest the greatest possible good out of it? Again, getting back to that challenge facet I was talking about, it's only through challenge that we come to growth.
That's right. And so I have distilled that idea down to one thing that I can absolutely stand by when it comes to how to be prepared for the enormous wave that's just a few years away. And that is to encourage people with every fiber of my being that if you don't have some form of daily spiritual practice, you are likely to suffer, because it's in that practice, whether it's in your breath or meditation or yoga or looking at the sky or putting your feet in the garden or walking around the block in a mindful way. It doesn't matter what the practice is, but each day, as you orient yourself to remind yourself that you are part of something greater, this universe that invented you, a feeling of grace, even under fire, and grace amongst great change can actually be yours. But if you don't orient yourself towards being a part of it on an everyday basis, and not with your rational mind, but with your irrational mind or your body itself, you will suffer when great change comes along and you yell back at the great change that's wafting over you. No, no, don't change. And it's in a daily spiritual practice that people on an individual basis will find how grace shows up for them.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a leap of faith on many, and you have to have it open. I think that's the right phrase for it. You have to sort of enter into it with a sense of, like you say, wonder and the optimism. Like this. But you can't imbue optimism in some people. Some people are going to be pessimistic regardless. But you can help them to see the logic behind the challenge, and the challenge is where you see the growth. I mean, you don't build a house without digging a foundation. A foundation is a hard thing to build and to build a house is a hard job. But once it's done, you've got shelter. So this is true for every facet of life. I mean, going to the supermarket at 5 o'clock is a pain in the neck because everybody else is there at the same time. But when you get home and you get your food, you're fine. So there are these challenges that go back and forth, and this is just, we don't always recognize it. And I think if people would take that, whatever they see to be a pain in their daily lives and apply it to the goodness that comes as a result, they might be able to look at it differently. But I think it's a difficult challenge for people to make that shift. And I think, like you're right, if you don't have that sense of grounded spirituality in you, you may not be able to weather the storm as well. So it's worthwhile for people to pursue those sort of things, and that's the way to go.
I agree, and what's I think great news is that there are infinite ways to connect in to that larger energy, and and therefore your capacity to explore and find the way that works for you is infinite as well. And here's another benefit of the internet: the tools and resources to have access to ways in which to ground in are a click away.
They're infinite, and you can click to anybody. You can click to the best or the worst. It's just a click away, as you say. As we move towards these times that we're coming up to, we find ourselves, and we can see this clearly happening. We see structures being torn down and new structures being put in place and new ways of operating and communicating. All those things are very useful and valuable, and offer us the possibility for enormous potential. This is, I come back to this word all the time. I say this to people all the time. I say, you've got all this, you may have these challenges in your life, but this is a great potential. You've got to see it as potential because there's energy there, and the energy of the difficulty can manifest in the most beautiful ways. This is where the true joy of being a human comes to light. It's through that plus and minus kind of interchange, the yin and the yang, that up and down, that left and right, whatever you want to call, whatever words you want to apply to it. It's in that dichotomy, that binary sort of way of the world, that we find ourselves coming to be the greatest manifestation of what we can ultimately be. It's through that challenge, that back and forth, like that tennis match.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
In your work, do you find that the message and the idea and how we approach difficult times is through that methodology? In other words, are you one who says, we are in difficult times, we've got to, yes, this is, like you mentioned in the very beginning of the show, yes, it's not going to get better, it may get worse, it may get harder, it may get difficult, but rather than run and hide, we seek to ground ourselves in a form that is fruitful and useful, and using that potential to get somewhere different. What is your methodology for that, other than just getting on stage and being enthusiastic?
Well, it certainly starts with being an attractive force. So the getting on stage and being enthusiastic part of it is that if I wave my hands around a lot and I shout a little, people will look my way. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I do believe about teachers in general is that there are students for the teacher that shows up. There's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon that I always loved, and I call it into attention frequently to make a point. It's a therapist and a client in their first session, and each one has a thought bubble. And the therapist's client has the thought bubble, I hope this therapist can fix what I have. The therapist is thinking, I hope this client has what I can fix.
That's
So
true.
when I sometimes, like I'm getting ready to teach some curriculum this summer for the first time on the internet in a significant way, I'm going to teach some conscious embodiment. And as I get closer to the point when I'm going to be marketing these classes, one's going to be orienting people to their, their natal chart so that they can use astrology more directly. And the second one will be a 4-month, curriculum on conscious embodiment. And as I've been thinking about just your question, like, what do I have to offer? And will people want it? I was reminded of that New Yorker cartoon and the notion of, well, if I present what I practice and what works for me, or some of the tools that are in my toolbox, then the students that come toward me will be the ones for whom that response is, that those tools will work, or they will fall away and they won't become students.
You teach by example, and you draw those who need it, and that's the perfect example of what you're referring to. Yeah, that makes perfect. You teach by example.
Yes, and so one of the things that is just simply true of me is that I have a relationship with my own physical body and the concept of embodiment that starts with that the breath is everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be a hallmark of my teaching, no matter what else I'm talking about, whether I'm talking about the value of having a relationship with your dreams, because I'm an expert in dream interpretation. I've got 3 books published on dream interpretation, and it was the first way that I was introduced into the media was as a dream expert. So, of course, I'm always going to be enthusiastic about people using their dreams to have a deeper experience of their own individual humanity. But it's always going to come back to the breath as central to your day-to-day experience. When people are unhappy or nervous or scared or enraged, the first thing that physiologically occurs is they hold their breath.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So why not start with teaching people to connect to their breath in a way that allows the mechanism and the instrument that their physical body is to have a relationship with the breath that is freer and more expressive of how the body itself wants to breathe, so that there's less holding of the breath. Mm-hmm. And then there's something that gets added right on top of that, and this is where being a psychologist is helpful, because I have a profound sort of understanding of how our mind's thought narrative creates feelings in us that then cause us to feel enraged or scared or sad, which then causes us to hold our breath and have a limited experience, because we're thinking a thought that's giving us anxiety, that's causing us to hold our breath, that's taking us out of the moment. So that on top of teaching people how to be in alignment with their breathing mechanism in a freer way, then there'll be the intention of teaching people to be mindful of the thoughts that they're having, because it's the one thing that we can actually control. We control the thoughts we're choosing to have. And so that's part of what I like to teach.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. It makes me wonder, though, but why are we so complex? Why do we have to go to these extremes? Why doesn't this come to us naturally? What do you think? Why is this such a chore? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that it requires extra work. It requires our intention to be placed in this area. Why didn't we come naturally be, preloaded with this ability, do you think?
One of the fun things that I sort of introduce anytime I'm in a teaching capacity and I'm asked a question like that, the first answer, which is the truest answer to questions like that, is, I have no idea.
Of course not.
I don't know. But because of that, because of the not knowing, because of not understanding why it's so complex, then a couple of things happen. One is I get that it is complex.
And you accept and move on, yeah.
I join you right there in the idea that I don't know why. Now, I have been at this game for many decades. I have been devoted to my own spiritual practice and my own consciousness unfolding and with my desire and attempts at operating at a higher level. One thing that I have learned through my own progression, through my own consciousness, is that though we start with this great complexity of unconsciousness, it is actually possible. And here's what's the salient piece is that though I don't know why, I do know that it's possible to lift up out of the depths of unconsciousness an enormous amount of your perception into conscious awareness. And when we do that, when we lift that stuff up out of the unconscious and we see the kinds of thought patterns that we are engaged in that don't serve us, that we didn't know were there when they were unconscious, once they are made conscious, we can change them, we can heal them, and we can move on as a result.
It's a remarkable aspect of being a human being to be able to have that control, and it's within our own reach. It's just a matter of learning how to do it, and it's just
absolutely. Yeah, it's a bit of a Herculean task. And that's why more people don't do it, because it's hard flipping work.
It is.
But one of the things that I think is true about the now moment, and the astrology backs this up, is because it's accelerating, because the energy is increasing, it really behooves everybody on the planet to at least move in the direction of a willingness to have a transformed experience, because the suffering is so acute. Mm-hmm. Who would want to stay in that suffering if there was actually, even if it's requiring of you an enormous amount of hard work and discipline, to have a better experience?
Yeah. And I guess what happens is that people short-circuit that experience by getting addicted to things and substances, and it sort of removes the chore in some way, hoping to get there by via some sort of shortcut. It just doesn't work, obviously.
Yeah. They've done that.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's a fascinating concept. One more question. We're running out of time here, unfortunately. But, I've read a lot recently about sort of the resurgence of astrology amongst younger people. And I'm wondering, I see that as a very positive sign. I do think people are much more involved than they used to be, or paying more credence to it than they have in the past. I'm wondering if you've come across that in your own work, and if you see that, how do you view that? I think it's a very valuable tool for all of us, and I do think it allows us to imbue tolerance for each other much easier as a result. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I absolutely see it. I have been invited to speak at events. There was an event a couple of years ago that I got invited to by two young clients of mine who are women in their 20s who are out and about sort of changing the world in their own way. Mm-hmm. And they invited me to do a little Dharma talk on the moon, I think it was. And I was just shocked to see this pretty large gathering of young people in Venice, California, just so engaged in what astrology had to offer. And it speaks to something that we brought up earlier in our conversation, which is what can happen in the generations to come. And I believe that the internet started this, Chris, that the internet has put in front of people astrological concepts that are now more ubiquitous, and therefore people are exposed to, well, where's the moon? What's happening when the eclipse is occurring? Oh, Mercury's retrograde again? Now, I don't know that everybody knows what it means to have Mercury retrograde, but now everybody knows what Mercury retrograde is as an idea. And then someone like me or you comes along and says, well, I can teach you really what Mercury retrograde means. But the baseline introduction to the consciousness that Mercury retrograde is a thing has already happened because of the internet. Right. Then when you do that teaching, or you write that article, or you do that Facebook Live video, and some bunch of kids in their 20s are seeing it, they already have the vocabulary so that it lands on them in a way that actually sparks an understanding of it. Now imagine those kids have kids, and their kids have kids. Now, we're 30, 40, 50, 60 years into the future, but we've got generations of people who have been raised on a consciousness that in this generation is being spread around. And when I imagine that, I can picture peace for humanity.
Yeah, I can see it too. That is a very interesting way of looking at it. And it makes perfect sense. You look at that broader arc of history and how it could unfold. Because now what may seem muddy is much clearer, and it becomes more clear as time goes on, as generations hand down this knowledge and further. And of course, we have more empirical data on which to draw upon. So obviously the aspects and the characteristics and the traits will all be more finite and better defined. So that also adds to the luxury of what we get at the end. Fascinating conversation, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on today. I've always enjoyed talking with you. We've run out of time, unfortunately. I've been talking today with Michael Lennox, Dr. Michael Lennox. He's a psychologist and an astrologer. I think he probably wears the astrology hat more these days than the psychology hat, but the two go together, so it doesn't really matter. His website is Michael Lennox, 2 L's, 2 N's, michaellennox.com. I encourage you to look into his site and into what he offers to the world. And maybe perhaps sign up for one of your seminars this summer that you're going to be looking at. And his books are available there. And he's a real vessel of knowledge and optimism, which I always appreciate because I love optimism and I like people who are full of it. So you've got them both, and I'm very happy to have you on today, Michael. It's been great to speak with you, and thanks so much. I encourage everyone to go to his website, michaellennox.com. 2 L's, 2 N's. They go together, one long word, michaellennox.com. Michael, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Chris.
It's been great. Take care, my friend. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.